Good day, I'm Dimple Pila Brage, and today I'm going to discuss about fairness, ethics, and standards. These are the list of contents that I'm going to discuss. First is introduction. Second is professionalism as a community of practitioners. Third, professionalism and democracy. Fourth, consequentialism. Fifth, on power and pessimism. Next is professional conduct, standards for practice. Next is responsibilities of language testers and their limitations. And the last is accountability. One of the initial problems we have is actually defining the terms. But even once this is done, there are many different views about the role that tests play in society and even whatever they can be fair at all. We believe, along with Shuhami, that tests are here to stay, and that despite the potentiality for their misuse, ethical and democratic approaches to testing provide opportunities and access to education and employment. And with Davis, we argue that professional response of language tester as a collective has to be that testing is a validity. At the heart of an ethical approach to language testing that is designed to achieve fairness is the concept of professionalism as developed by Davis. And we agree that what a professional does is to provide a conduct for the profession and the individual with public, thereby safeguarding all. Next, we have professionalism as a community of practitioners. Each individual language tester counts himself or herself as part of a community of practitioners and therefore engages in discussion, debate, and research that leads to progress. According to Rorty, 1999, long after you are dead, better informed and more sophisticated people may judge your action to have been a tragic mistake, just as they may judge your scientific beliefs as intelligible only by reference to an obsolete paradigm. Regarding the latter, Pierce argues that if members of a community who share a commitment to certain cause and method pursue their investigation. Peirce was not a fatalist, rather as an empiricist. He did not want to appeal to some metaphysical conception to justify his view of what is constituted. The opinion that is fated to ultimately agreed to by all who investigate is what we mean by the truth, and the object represented in this opinion is the real. That is the way I would explain reality. Next, we have the case study 1 about intelligence testing. Alfred Binet produced the first intelligence test in 1909. The purpose of the test was to classify children into mental levels with explicit purpose of providing additional help for those with low scores. Binet believed that intelligence was linked to environment and that with additional help children could improve their scores and become more intelligent. According to Goddard, if both parents are feeble minded, all children will be feeble minded. It is obvious that such mating should not be allowed. It is perfectly clear that no feeble minded person should ever be allowed to marry or to become a parent. It is obvious that if this rule is to be carried out, the intelligent part of society must enforce it. The educational testing and assessment community is now agreed and unanimously that these beliefs and uses of the test were unethical, unfair, and empirically unfounded. Next, we have individuality and participation. This leads us to consider the role of the individual within the community. Within the view of ethics that we are presenting, the individual has a critical and pivotal role constantly challenge the community to question its own currently accepted position. According to Mill, wrong opinions and practices gradually yield to facts and argument, but facts and arguments to produce any effect on the mind must be brought before it. Next, we have professionalism and democracy. The individual language tester therefore has a responsibility to the professional community and to the society within which he or she works, being neither subservient to the community or society nor independent from them. Democracy means that personality is the first and final reality. It holds that the spirit of personality indwells in every individual, that the choice to develop it must proceed from that individual. According to Dewey, personality is the wanting of permanent and abiding worth, and that in every human individual there lies personality. Putnam says, only in a democracy can we operate the scientific method of inquiry, rather than rely on tenacity, authority, or what is agreeable to reason. This is the same conclusion as that reached by Shuhami, where she calls for continuous examination of testing. Silence about testing is the real enemy, not the testing practice itself. Shuhami advised, do it, but do it with care. Next, we have consequentialism. Misik introduced the notion of consequential validity to educational testing and assessment, and it has become a central notion in language testing. The concept of distributive justice deals with the appropriateness of access to the conditions and goods that affect individual well-being, which is broadly conceived to include psychological, physiological, economic, and social aspects. We are thus faced with multiple sources of potential injustice. Injustice in values, of roles, or implementation, and of decision making procedures. And it must be remembered that the whole selection system is to be justified, not the test alone. Next, we have on power and pessimism. Foucault claims that all examinations are symbols of power and control. The evolution of the test in education is a form of control, in which the test takers are turned into objects to be measured and classified. The whole notion of knowledge is a construct used by the powerful to oppress the weak and keep them under control. My own view is that such relativist approaches are attainable since they would also allow for more extreme practices, for example, cannibalism, torture, slavery, to be accorded a relativist sanction, according to Davis. Next, we have relativism and power. Hank Lyons argues that the growing interest in ethics is related to the fact that language testers have had a positivist approach to their discipline, that the object of our inquiry really exists. She encouraged the exercise power as all language testing is a political act. Hump Lyons expand upon this with an explicit statement of what ethical language testing is under postmodernism. Hump Lyons takes a postmodern perspective because it opens up an awareness and sensitivity to difference and variety, creating a concern for the minority and underrepresented in society. She also writes, I do suspect that what is considered ethically acceptable varies from country to country, culture to culture. Fulcher argued that there can be no answer within a postmodern paradigm because there are different ethics for different societies. Davis says relativism opens up the doors to practices that we would consider to be unethical. Relativism are also the primary critics of applied linguistics and the practice of language testing. The language of power is used to argue that Western applied linguists or language testers do not have the right to impose their views and practices on others. In language testing terms, if some European test producers do not design to test to acceptable minimum standards, this implies that scores on tests may fluctuate for many reasons that are unrelated to the abilities that tests are designed to measure. Next, we have taking power into account. Tests are not used to maintain the power of section of society, nor does it imply that tests are not misused. We can agree with Ham that testing is a political act and an instance of the exercise of power. However, this can equally be for the good of the individual test takers and society. Shuhami argues that tests are instruments of power because of six factors. First, tests are administered by powerful institutions. Test takers take tests that are set by organizations that have complete control over the type and content of the tests that are set. These tests prioritize what is considered to be important by educational system. Failure to get the appropriate grades can therefore lead to fewer educational or work opportunities. Next, we have tests use the language of science. The use of scientific and the presentation of tests and examination in scientific terms gives the process authority, and so that public make an assumption that testing systems are fair and trustworthy even if they are not. Third, tests use the language of numbers. The use of numbers is endemic in society and the media. Quoting numbers in a report, even if these are questionable, gives the report an air of authority. The fourth factor is that tests use written forms of communication. Introducing the written test in which there is no communication increases the sense that the process was scientific. Test takers require to demonstrate the knowledge that is valued without being able to interpret that knowledge. Fifth, reliance on documentation. Test results can be recorded and documented so that each individual has a file that can be used for comparison with others, as well as classifying and judging the individual. A permanent record of the person is created that exists forever. The last factor is test use objective formats. The truth is contained in the test, as most tests contain items to which there is a correct response. This is even the case with some constructed response items or tasks, where the format and scoring procedure limit what can be said and what can be valued. Next, we have the case study 2 about language testing and gatekeeping. Many countries around the world use language as a method of controlling immigration. This is done because the countries would be accused of racism if the controls were to be openly imposed without some pretext. It is not only English speaking countries that are engaged in this kind of gatekeeping. It is now common across the European Union, according to Fulcher. The practice of using tests in this way appears to have little to do with language skills necessary for employment, but rather whether they can claim cultural identity with the host country. Example of this practice is the Australian dictation test. At that time, Australia was experiencing significant immigration from Asia, and the number of immigrants had begun to alarm white workers who feared for their jobs. In order to overcome this problem, a dictation test was introduced that allowed officials to exclude individuals on the basis of race without race being the explicit reason for the decision. The dictation tests were to be of 50 words or more in length, and a level of difficulty that would result in failure. Next, we have language tests for immigration. The use of tests as instruments of immigration policy in Australia has not abated. Hawthorne relays the story of the access test developed in the 1990s to limit the flow of skilled immigrants to Australia. The step test was designed to allow the immigrants to pass, so that, as Hawthorne says, STEP had a capacity to deliver the Australian government a solution which was timely, cheap, and administratively simple. Bishop highlights two problems language testers have with the issue of immigration. First, the work of language test developers may be used for purposes which are not obvious to us. Second, even if we believe that the use of tests to restrict or enable immigration is unethical, are likely to be others in the professional community who would disagree. Next, we have professional conduct standards for practice. The ELTA Code of Ethics sets out broad ethical principles, but does not constrain or prescribe practice at all. Standards, on the other hand, provide much more detailed guidelines for professional conduct. According to Davidson et al., standard can refer to a guideline for good practice. For example, an important standard for educational tests is that their developers should demonstrate evidence of test validity. The standards for educational and psychological testing are probably the most frequently cited standards available, although the Code of Fair Testing Practices is also widely used. Next, we have responsibilities of language testers and their limitations. Hump Lyon said, on the one hand, those who extend the responsibility for both intended and unintended tests use the society to general. Davis said, On the other hand, those who would limit the responsibility to within reasonable limits. Shuhami advocates the development of shared responsibility by involving all stakeholders in the decision making process, a stance with which we strongly agree. Next, we have accountability. The standards, ERA et al., have been cited in U.S. court cases, which also make them relevant to issues of accountability to test takers. This becomes an issue in a jurisdiction where equal protection legislation of any kind has been introduced, and therefore a perception of unfair treatment can lead to legal action. These mainly involve cases where discrimination against subgroups of the population has to be established, particularly discrimination by race, gender, or disability. Fulcher and Bamford review key legal cases involving testing, primarily in the United States. In these cases, it is necessary to establish that the outcomes of testing have led to differential treatment and or the reduction in opportunities for the group or an individual from this group. So these are the summary of my topic. We have argued that a postmodern perspective on ethics and fairness in language testing leads to relativism, which is a counsel of despair. The basis for international professional practice, like democracy, cannot therefore lie in another world. We then have to appeal to the notion of engagement with the professional community, which will lead us in a direction that we cannot as yet predict, but we believe will be better. So, do you have any questions? If you have questions, you can comment below. Thank you for listening. Have a good day. Goodbye.